them to darn good use. When he was still in school, Hugh exhibited a commitment to African American concerns, a commitment that led him, when he graduated from Yale Law School in 1966, to join the New Haven Legal Assistance Association to practice criminal law and represent newly formed community organizations. To dedicate himself during the turbulent late 1960s to restoring neighborhood vitality and intergroup cooperation as executive director of the Black Coalition of New Haven. And after 5 years with an urban affairs consulting firm in New Haven, to serve his city as human resources administrator, supervising the local Head Start programs and services for youth and senior citizens. Hugh's well-known skills as a communicator were perfected during the next phase of his career, 4 years writing editorials on a broad range of public policy issues as a member of the editorial board of the New York Times. And then 6 years as senior vice president of the New York's public television station, Channel 13, where he managed local broadcasting and national production. He continues to write for a wide variety of publications, and his weekly column, To Be Equal, is published in African American newspapers across the country. Just before taking on the leadership of the League, Hugh was vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and there his responsibilities included domestic initiatives in education for at-risk youth and the foundation's program to increase minority opportunities in the United States. Hugh brings to all of his endeavors a creative mind and an ability to express his ideas in a straightforward, memorable manner. And I'm sure tonight will be no exception. On a personal note, I went to a small New England liberal arts college in Massachusetts. It's not particularly well known, by the name of Williams College. Chuck Collins also graduated from Williams College. That's kind of funny, the chairman and a senior vice chairman, both coming from the same institution. But you know, when you go to a college, any college, alma mater, you have a rivalry. Usually there is one identifiable institution which strikes vehemence in your heart and your mind. And you are programmed over the course of the 4 years and ever after as an alumnus or an alumna to loathe anything or anyone having anything to do with that other institution. So you can well understand the consternation that struck me shortly after my ascending to the chairmanship when I discovered that Hugh Price was a graduate of Amherst College, that very rival that Williams College has in the world. What am I to do? Alas, he has great insight, and he is a man who can rise above all occasions, because I quickly figured out that he long ago discovered the problem he had of having attended Amherst, and he rectified it by marrying into a family where Marilyn, his wife's father, and brother are both graduates of Williams. And he even allowed, I should say it another way, one of his daughters had the smarts and the wisdom to go to Williams College as well. Would you please join me in welcoming to the podium for the keynote address to the 1997 National Conference of the National Urban League, our President and our Chief Executive Officer and our leader, Hugh Price.
Thank you very much. John, thank you for that warm introduction. As the urban leaguers among us know, this 87th annual conference marks John's first as chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the National Urban League. He's a remarkable volunteer leader of our movement and a kind spirit to allow an Amherst person to share the leadership with him. John brings steady guidance and strong support to me and our board, and our venerable movement runs deep in John's veins. The veteran urban leaguers among us will remember that his father, Jim Lennon, also chaired our board. So John is our first, second-generation chair, and he's living proof of our favorite saying, John is living proof of our favorite saying, once an urban leaguer, always an urban leaguer. Our movement is also a family affair for my loved ones. First and foremost, my wife, Marilyn, who is the love of my life and an extraordinary support without whom I could not do this work. I'm delighted that our daughters, Traer, Janine, and Lauren are also here with us. So is my mother, Charlotte Price, who wouldn't miss this conference. Let me ask my immediate family please to rise. My brother and sister-in-law, Klein and Beebe, have become regulars as well, and this year they're joined by their son, Klein. Now, since both Marilyn and I grew up in D.C., many other family members are here with us tonight. They include Charlene Drew Jarvis, the city councilwoman, who is my sister-in-law. Marilyn's brother, Sterling, his wife, Kathy, and their sons, Sterling and Stephen. Our sister, Clarissa Lloyd, and her children, Saban, Devin, and David. And there are other family members here as well. Let me ask them to stand and please extend a warm Urban League greeting. It's a special treat this evening that the former First Lady of our movement, Margaret Young, the Whitney of Whitney Young, is with us this evening. Please give her a rousing round of applause. Margaret, I want you to know that we found Whitney's desk at the old headquarters. We have refurbished it, and in our new headquarters is now back where it belongs, in the office of the President and CEO of the National Urban League. Some distinguished veterans of our movement have attained special status. I speak of the 39 senior-most Urban League CEOs who collectively have logged over 700 years of outstanding service to our movement. They have constituted themselves as an Academy of Fellows whose mission is to spread their wisdom to the young whippersnappers in our movement like me. Please join me in paying fitting tribute to those CEOs who are the backbone of the Urban League movement, the Academy of Fellows right here in the front. Please rise. Lastly, I want to introduce the youngest members of the Urban League family, our NULiters. These brilliant and beautiful young people are here in full force, almost 400 strong. The Toledo contingent even walked all the way here from home to bring the message that they are doing the right thing. The theme of their youth summit this year is right on target and right on time. Their theme, and listen closely, the foundation you lay determines the future I build. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show our NULiters that we hear their message loud and clear. I want them to stay seated, and I want every adult in this hall to rise and give our NULiters a rousing welcome. Now, the passage of time often brings losses that are tough to fathom and to accept. In less than a month, the Urban League has lost two youthful pillars of our movement. Gary Sudduth, the CEO of the Minneapolis Urban League, and Cy Butler, the Executive Vice President in Indianapolis, both passed away suddenly and prematurely. Our nation lost two legends as well. We all know that Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, met a tragic and untimely death. She was the epitome of dignity and an icon in her own right. Less noticed, but less a loss, was the passing of Robert Weaver, who was the first African American in the history of this country to become a cabinet secretary. His death hit very close to home because back in the 1920s, Dr. Weaver and my dad were classmates at the legendary Dunbar High School right here in Washington, D.C., which is Eleanor Holmes Norton's alma mater as well. I met Dr. Weaver in the mid-60s, soon after he was appointed Secretary of HUD. I was in law school at the time, and I don't think I ever told him this, but he was the professional role model of who I wanted to be when I grew up. Please join me in a moment of silence in memory of these four remarkable people who have left us recently. Thank you. Earlier this summer, President Bill Clinton gave a moving speech about race relations in America. Cynics question his motives, and some even question his moral authority to lead the country in a conversation about race. Let the cynics whine. I say our nation is better served by dealing with the hard questions that the President put to all Americans. The key issue, as the 20th century winds down, is what kind of society we intend to become in the century ahead. Are we ready, like it or not, to become the most robustly multi-ethnic democracy in the history of humankind, or will we blow this historic opportunity by becoming a replay of Bosnia, but on a bigger screen? To me, the answer is simple. In order to share the space we call the United States, we must learn to share the opportunities we call the American dream. The complexion of America will change dramatically in our lifetimes. By the middle of the next century, the U.S. population will be half Caucasian, half people of color. Americans must come to terms with this reality, or else we will never become one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. What exactly does it mean to come to terms with this new reality? It means we must acknowledge that the prejudice that dwells in our hearts to this day toward those of different complexions and cultures must be purged. We must purge our souls of racism, anti-Semitism, immigrant and Asian bashing if our nation is to prosper and prevail. And that is why the National Urban League has joined with Sandy Cloud and the National Confernce, with the National Council of La Raza, the Anti-Defamation League, and Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics in an initiative called the National Voices for an Inclusive 21st Century. We must come to terms with this new reality by understanding that the roots of today's racial tensions reach back to slavery. But it also means acknowledging that the histories of other aggrieved groups must also be taken into account. And as we of National Voices say, any dialogue about race ultimately must look to the future if it's to make a difference. And that's why blacks, whites, and yes, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Native Americans belong at the round table from day one of any national discussion about race. Let me also make an unsolicited offer to President Clinton. The Urban League movement has been in the business of promoting racial harmony for nearly a century. Our commitment is reflected in the day in and day out work of our Urban League affiliates all across the country. You know, when the governor of South Carolina needed help on race relations, he turned to the Columbia Urban League for assistance in creating a state commission. When the mayor of Kansas City decided it was time for a task force on race relations, he asked the Kansas City Urban League to start it up and to staff it. When racial tensions erupted in Rochester, the Urban League there took the lead in convening other groups to devise a master plan for dealing with the problem. Mr. President, improving race relations is what we Urban Leaguers do for a living. We're on the same wavelength with you and your commission on race relations. Between the National Urban League and our 114 affiliates, Collectively, we probably have 2,000 years worth of experience in this business. Mr. President, we're here, and we're here to help. Use us. We might as well work together from the start, because in the communities we serve, it's impossible to deal with this hot-button issue without dealing with the Urban League movement. Coming to terms with the new American reality means that any national conversation about race must quickly turn to national commitments to open wide the doors of opportunity once and for all. If we're to move as a nation beyond conferring access based on ethnicity, then white males must release their cast iron grip on privilege. The gates of opportunity should be locked open, not shut. And all those glass ceilings that have kept us in our place must be smashed for good. The ultimate test of whether we come to terms with the new reality is whether we finally extend the American dream to all Americans. Now, the foundation of this dream consists of three ingredients. First, economic opportunity, and ultimately economic power for those who play by society's rules. Second, quality education which equips all young people to play. And third, compassion and minimally decent life supports for those who cannot play by the rules. This evening I want to talk about each of these three ingredients, and let me begin with the first one, namely economic opportunity and economic power. As you know, the theme of this year's National Urban League Conference is Economic Power, the Next Civil Rights Frontier. Why did we choose this theme? The reason is pretty straightforward. The end game in a capitalist democracy like ours is economic power. Economic opportunity is, as we lawyers say, the condition precedent for economic power. Translated, that means that opportunity is the pathway to power. And any society that is truly of the people, for the people, and by the people must share its economic bounty with all the people. That's why employers mustn't shrink from their commitment to inclusion, even in the face of unrelenting assaults on affirmative action. That's why labor unions must step up their commitment to include everyone in their ranks from bottom to top, for it's in the world of work where most Americans earn their livings. And make no mistake, the patterns of exclusion and abuse of African American workers persist to this day. Just look at all those lawsuits filed by disgruntled black employees. Nor, I should say, are those glass ceilings an illusion. It's easy to see through them to what's really going on inside corporations. So American industry, which has made great strides toward inclusion, still has many laps to go before it gets it right. This is especially true of all those small firms that operate way below the radar screen of public scrutiny. You know, they can thumb their noses at the Federal Equal Opportunity Employment Commission because it's buried under a backlog of 80,000 cases, so who needs to worry about them? Don't be fooled by the foes of affirmative action who say all we need is tough sanctions against discrimination. Relying on overburdened enforcers to catch bigots after the fact is far less effective than encouraging inclusion up front. Now, promoting economic self-sufficiency has been a major priority of our movement since its inception in 1910. Back then, we helped folk who were migrating from farms and from towns in the South to the factories and cities up north. Today, we're helping them navigate a vastly different and tougher journey. It's a journey from the workplace of the industrial age to the labor market of the information age. And from Cleveland to Los Angeles, our affiliates are taking their long-standing relationships with corporations up to a new plateau by contracting to provide well-prepared workers in sectors like banking and automobile supply. Yet for all our success in job training and placement, the Urban League movement isn't satisfied with individual self-sufficiency as the ultimate goal. any more than other ethnic groups set such modest limits on their own aspirations. We black folk must push past the goal of economic self-sufficiency and go for the gold in this market economy, and that is why we urban leaguers say economic power is the next civil rights frontier. You might ask why we say this is a civil rights challenge. Well, just like the epic struggles over integration and segregation, America again must choose a course. Our society touts the virtues of entrepreneurship, yet it tosses one obstacle after another in the way of African American entrepreneurs who want to play the game. Take public contracting. By restricting the use of race as a factor in awarding contracts, the U.S. Supreme Court has severely crippled minority firms. In the name of eradicating reverse discrimination, the courts have actually exacerbated racial exclusion from public contracting. The challenge before us now is how to manage the rules of a healthy capitalist economy so that those who tend to be excluded get to play the game. There's a second reason why we urban leaguers say economic power is the next civil rights frontier. While black folk must help shape the debate over the rules of the game, we must also resolve to play the game hard, whether we like the rules or not. 50 years ago, Jackie Robinson seized greatness. Jackie Robinson didn't wait for permission to be great. We have an unprecedented talent pool to take our people to an entirely new plateau of economic power. Thanks to their own ability and thanks, yes, to affirmative action, which opened the doors to these brilliant young people, we now have a 20-year supply of awesomely talented MBAs, attorneys, and undergraduate business and marketing majors who have the requisite skills and mindset. We have scores of management consultants, plant managers, product managers, salespeople, and even senior executives who've worked inside corporations in the core profit and loss end of the business. There's a whole new generation of African American entrepreneurs who are doing marvelous things, not just in minority markets, but in mainstream markets. Black Enterprise magazine has chronicled this story for a quarter of a century. And almost single-handedly, Earl Graves has been the Pied Piper of economic power. Let's give this visionary a rousing round of applause. Earl, the rest of us have finally heard your song. This month, Fortune magazine discovered what Black Enterprise has been reporting on for a quarter of a century, and Fortune did a breathtaking spread on the new Black Power. The stunning gatefold cover included our own trustee, Bill Lewis of Morgan Stanley. I'm proud to say that the National Urban League sparked Fortune's interest in publishing this historic issue of the magazine. Now, the living legends on the cover of Black Enterprise in June and the Young Turks portrayed this month in Fortune aren't the only successful practitioners of economic power. We must also make certain that our young people see that they can earn a decent and honorable living through micro-enterprise. They need to know the story of the solo entrepreneur who refinishes the floors in our house. With my money, he has visited more Caribbean islands than I will ever see. Yet his capital assets consist only of a battered van, several sanding machines, some cans of urethane, and a reputation for quality and reliability. The key is he works hard, he starts and finishes when he promises to, and he cares about quality control. If this micro-entrepreneur delivers on these fronts, then I don't quibble about his price or about how many Caribbean islands he will visit in the future. Our urban leagues are pushing this message in many ways. Last May, the Cleveland Urban League sponsored a National Economic Development Summit on franchising. Out in Kansas City, the Oklahoma City Urban League, out in Oklahoma City, the Urban League helped small business owners secure startup financing. Several affiliates, including Trenton, operate a KidCo program where youngsters run mini businesses. And this fall, the Phoenix Urban League is starting a charter school devoted to entrepreneurship. Many of our affiliates are in the community development business. They're building and managing shopping centers, creating venture capital funds, brokering opportunities for black entrepreneurs, and attracting private and public investments back to the neighborhoods we serve. Now, with our superstars and our bench strength of small entrepreneurs, we African Americans got the right stuff to take full advantage of a huge opportunity that's unfolding right under our noses. I speak of the revival of America's cities. There's new juice downtown, as anyone who has driven around downtown Washington will see. There's new juice in urban neighborhoods and nearby suburbs. Crime is down and tourism is up. You know, last Wednesday, developers broke new ground for the first supermarket to be built in Chicago's South Side in a half a century. Even long-suffering Detroit is showing signs of life. Housing prices in the Motor City rose 6% last year. Now, mainstream companies are eagerly tapping into this new energy and immense purchasing power in cities. This is the new civil rights frontier. And the key question is, are we players? And shame on us if we let this historic opportunity slip by, only to moan many years later that we're still on the outside looking in. Why else do we say that economic power is the next civil rights frontier? Consider the dividends that economic power pays to our community. For starters, Eddie Williams' Center for Political and Economic Studies tells us that firms owned by our folk are much more likely to hire our folk from the inner city. Economic power provides the fuel for exercising political clout, for mobilizing our ballot power so that politicians who covet our vote don't take us for granted. It provides the fuel for influencing national election outcomes, which, as we've learned the hard way of late, helps shape the composition of those federal courts that ultimately rule on issues close to home, like affirmative action and contract set-asides. Economic power generates the wealth that makes black philanthropy a potent force for good. Had Bill and Camille Cosby never accumulated their wealth through a combination of awesome talent and business acumen, they could never have donated, what was it, $40 million to Spelman College. And without their generosity, Spelman would not have been catapulted into the very front ranks of liberal arts colleges in the United States of America. Other ethnic groups allocate some of their wealth to make certain that their equivalents of the Urban League, NAACP, and Legal Defense Fund are formidable enough to assert their interests and protect their rights. And so must we. To amass economic power, we must maintain a sense of community. This doesn't mean behaving all alike, but it does mean developing a keener sense of self-interest. Corporations won't pay attention if they don't feel the pinch of organized pressure or the prospect of spirited competition for our dollar. And this is precisely where the goal of economic power and the tactics of civil rights intersect. Our movement has long been about creating economic power for the African American community. That's the solid base from which we'll build in our work. Watch us, work with us, and support us as we play an even bigger role in the economic empowerment of our people. I said at the outset that the foundation of the American dream is made of three ingredients. I've just discussed the first, economic power. The second ingredient is quality education that equips every child to play by society's rules. We must make certain that today's minority youngsters, who will comprise half of America's adults by the year 2050, are fully prepared to pull their weight. We must make certain that all of America's children reach their fullest potential as providers, employees, entrepreneurs, customers, and yes, taxpayers. We black folk must never throw in the towel on school integration. Youngsters of all races who attend integrated schools are better equipped for the new America that awaits them. So where the population mix permits and kids don't have ridiculous commutes, let's stay the integration course. But it's also a fact that millions of our youngsters attend schools in communities that are demographically landlocked with hardly a white family in sight. Last January, I visited one of those schools with my colleague, Joan Lucas. It's Tilden High School in Confernce. That's a section of Brooklyn. Tilden High School is a big, old, traditional high school, and it hardly has any white students. If it does, I didn't see them. Realistically speaking, we can't bus 3,000 students from deep inside Brooklyn out to Great Neck, Long Island, or Greenwich, Connecticut. Nor am I about to ask them to wait for a good education until their neighborhood is gentrified by white families with school-aged children, which isn't going to happen anytime soon anyway. This isn't about resurrecting Plessy v. Ferguson, which segregated students as a matter of law. It's about acknowledging reality and getting on with the business of preparing our children for the future. And make no mistake, we can. In its heyday, Dunbar gave black kids like Bob Weaver and my father and Eleanor Holmes Norton a world-class education. We know it can be done today, and we know how to do it. Linda Darling Hammond, a brilliant sister at Columbia Teachers College, lays out all the evidence in her important new book entitled The Right to Learn. What is her bottom line? It's this: when black and white children of comparable ability receive excellent instruction, they do about equally well. What we want for our children is what every child in America needs: quality preschool education, qualified teachers who genuinely believe that our kids can learn, access to intellectually challenging courses, schools where the core mission is student learning instead of keeping order, constructive programs and caring adults after school and over the summer while their parents are off earning a living. Those are the fundamentals of quality education. Now, quality education at the K-12 level continues all the way through adolescence, and it lays the foundation for opportunity. Higher education adds the finishing touches. The population changes underway in this country provide all the moral and economic justification we need for colleges and universities to stay the course on inclusion and affirmative action. To the 62 university presidents who have publicly endorsed affirmative action, I say, stay strong, stay the course, and we of the Urban League movement will stand with you. Don't be cowed by the likes of Ward Connolly and his ilk. To promote inclusion openly, we must deal honestly with what we mean by merit. Cynical opponents of affirmative action have snookered people, and yes, the press, into thinking that test scores equate exactly with qualifications. They would have us believe that a black student who registers a combined score of 1250 on the Scholastic Aptitude Test is more deserving than a black student who scores 100 points or even 25 points lower. This is a bold-faced distortion of what the test designers themselves say about those tests. They tell me that gaps this narrow signified little, if anything, about a college applicant's long-term prospects for success. To judge talent and potential fairly, colleges should also be able to weigh creativity, motivation, persistence, and leadership skills. Now, these intangibles aren't measured easily by tests, but there's no question, as any corporate executive can tell you, that they count in the real world. I've talked so far about society's obligations to our children, but in the final analysis, it's up to us as parents and as community leaders. For we must understand that without education, there can be no economic power. Every group that has survived and thrived in the face of adversity views education as the cornerstone of their success. They outlearn, they outprepare, they outwit, and they outwork all who would do them in. They operate continuously on the leading edge of technological and scientific knowledge so that they always maintain a competitive advantage. And so must we. And thanks to the National Urban League's partnership with NYNEX, several Urban League affiliates are establishing state-of-the-art technology centers that will help our youngsters become state-of-the-art themselves. We will extend this prototype to all affiliates. And we are especially grateful to Ivan Seidenberg and NYNEX for their visionary support. Thank you, Ivan. Now, we must be clear-eyed and unsentimental about where the fight over affirmative action is headed. We must see clearly that the 3-lane turnpike into higher education has been scaled back to 2 lanes. Going, gone are those slow lanes for students with lousy grades and low test scores. We must be clear that only 2 lanes are left: traffic flow and the passing lane. And our children had better be in one lane or the other, and preferably the passing lane, or they'll be inhaling the exhaust fumes of other students who are racing toward opportunity. That is our obligation, to make sure all of our new lighters and all of our children are in the passing lane. And let us start by putting a stop to that anti-achievement peer culture in our own community. The word among all too many of our youngsters on the street, but not, I'm sure, among any new lighter, is that doing well academically means acting white. Our children must understand that dissing education is tantamount to signing a death warrant for their dreams. My friends, this is precisely why, as you'll learn on Wednesday, the Urban League movement is joining forces with the Congress of National Black Churches and with more than a dozen sororities, fraternities, civic clubs, and professional groups to mount a campaign for African American achievement. This is the real deal. This isn't a press release. One of the first commitments of the campaign is to transform our annual recognition of youngsters who are doing the right thing into a truly community-wide celebration of our young people. Join with us again this September 20th to make certain that we adults do the right thing for our children. Now, convincing our children that achievement matters is task number 1 for the new campaign. Task number 2 is taking educators and elected officials to task if they don't deliver for our children. As consumers of public education, we no longer can accept the status quo. Too many of our children are served too miserably to allow it to continue. So let me issue a loud and clear warning to all who preside over urban school systems. The forces of revolutionary change are massing on your borders and beginning to make successful forays. On one flank is the charter school movement, which even includes some of our affiliates. On another flank are the voucher folk. Some schools or districts are even replacing entire faculties of failing schools. Public education cannot shield itself from the winds of change that are sweeping across our nation. American industry has undergone a fundamental restructuring which has sharpened its focus on customers' needs, on productivity, and on bottom-line performance. And the results are evident in the strong recovery of the U.S. economy. It is only a matter of time before the same drive for performance and accountability pushes its way into public schools. And the move for tougher academic standards is merely the first wave. So I say to the urban education establishment, the era of excuses and inertia is over. We hereby put public school teachers, principals, school boards, superintendents, and state education commissioners on notice. If urban schools as we know them continue to fail in the face of all we know about how to improve them, then your customers will be obliged to shop elsewhere for quality education. Let me say this to my good friend Bob Chase, the head of the National Education Association. We urban leaguers believe passionately in public education. We know there are millions of great teachers out there. But please make no mistake, as passionately as we believe in public education, we love our children even more. Our children, not the schools they attend, are our destiny. Let me close with some briefer thoughts about the third ingredient: compassion and decent life supports for those who can't play by the rules. As we all know, welfare reform is now a fact of life. And let's be clear, we urban leaguers believe that everyone should earn his or her keep. But the key is that there must be a keep to earn. In other words, there must be jobs. Now, I know that those of us who harp on the fact that there may not be enough work to go around are called a bunch of chicken littles because the economy is booming. Well, we all knew that the early days of welfare reform would be the easiest, and that's because the go-getters would go get jobs. But the great unknown is how many former recipients will find unsubsidized jobs as the strict time limits on welfare tick down. Firms like Sprint and Marriott that want to help are finding it hard going. That comes as no surprise. One study I read actually warned that fewer than half of the folks who were tossed off of welfare will manage to find work. So to avert a calamity, government must fill the void. Otherwise, we'll read even more heart-wrenching stories about children who've been left in public parks during the day while their mothers search for work. One mother in New York City who couldn't find a job actually left her 2 freshly bathed children in a park with a note pinned to them which said, "I just can't afford to take care of them anymore." So we chicken littles will keep on squawking about society's commitment to the least among us. It's true that the sky hasn't fallen yet, but it could fall if we aren't careful and if we aren't compassionate. It's often instructive to close a keynote address with a brief history lesson. Our ancestors who were liberated by the Emancipation Proclamation knew the rudiments of self-reliance from day one. They understood that education and economic power are intertwined. Because within a few years of being free, these former slaves set about creating 2 institutions that were key to their survival and prosperity as free people. They established colleges and universities, and they established businesses, from the independent farms of my grandfather to the burial societies that became our great insurance companies. Earlier this century, the visionary Madam C.J. Walker even created one of America's first multinational corporations. Just last Friday, I spent a day that encapsulated my message tonight. We opened the day at Howard University with our new lighters. This legendary university was the center of my world when I was growing up here in Washington. The new lighters learned about the great contributions by this historically black university to the advancement of our people. That same evening, the Baltimore Urban League entertained us at its landmark headquarters, the old Orchard Street Church. This church was built by slaves in 1837. We were treated in the sanctuary to a dance performance by a remarkably talented 16-year-old named Damian Patterson, who had choreographed his own version of "I Believe I Can Fly, I Believe I Can Touch the Sky." Later that night, my daughters Treyer and Lauren, my brother and sister-in-law Klein and Bibi, toured the building together. Downstairs in the basement of the Baltimore Urban League, there's actually a section of the Underground Railroad that our forebears used to escape from slavery to freedom. You could feel their spirits in this hallowed place. Right after the tour, I happened to meet a young sister named Yolanda Lang. She was sporting a classy leather pocketbook that was classier and better looking than anything Coach could ever produce. I learned that she designs these bags and owns the company that produces them, and that she operates out of Milan, Italy, like a modern Madam C.J. Walker. I learned that in the Baltimore Urban League, 2 flights above the Underground Railroad. Our ancestors clawed their way through the Underground Railroad so that our NULiters, so that Damien, and so that Yolanda, and so that all of our children would get a chance someday to fly, a chance one day to touch the sky. My fellow urban leaguers and friends, that day has arrived this day on the dawn of the new millennium. We have journeyed this week to the world's capital of capitalism. We were drawn here by a shared recognition that economic power is indeed the next civil rights frontier. Our mission, while we are here together, is to chart the course for crossing this final frontier which separates African Americans from the American dream. My fellow urban leaguers and friends, I hereby declare this 87th annual conference of the National Urban League Movement open for business.